I'm Haley, 32 years old. The moment I walked into that courtroom, my mother rolled her eyes. Not a subtle roll either, the kind that screams, "Here we go again." As if my very presence was ruining her perfect victim act. But then Judge Brennan froze. His eyes lifted from the paperwork to my face, and I saw recognition hit him like a train. "Wait," he said slowly, setting his pen down. "These allegations are against you?" My parents had no idea who I really was, and honestly, that was probably the best part. Let me back up 3 months. My grandfather, Judge William Parker, had just passed away. 40 years on the Supreme Court bench. The man who actually raised me while my parents were off living their best lives pretending I didn't exist. The funeral was huge. Every judge, attorney, and politician in the state came to pay respects. I gave the eulogy. My parents sat in the back row, arrived late, and left before the reception. Classic Diane and Scott Morrison. I hadn't seen them in over a decade, not since my 18th birthday when my grandmother died. They'd shown up for exactly 90 minutes and vanished again. After Grandma Helen passed, it was just Grandpa and me. He was 73 then, still sharp, still working, still making sure I had every chance possible. Here's the truth about my parents. My mother got pregnant at 18 and decided motherhood cramped her style. My father was a promising hockey player with big dreams. A baby didn't fit the aesthetic. So, they did what selfish people do. Dropped me at my grandparents' house when I was 3 months old, then basically disappeared. They visited twice a year if the stars aligned. Christmas and maybe my birthday. Diane would show up wearing designer clothes, kiss the air near my cheek, then spend the whole visit criticizing Grandma for being too soft. Meanwhile, Scott avoided those visits completely because Grandpa called him out for being a deadbeat. I saw my father on TV instead. Every time the Bruins played, Grandpa turned on the game. Not because he cared about hockey, but because he wanted me to know my father existed somewhere, even if he chose not to exist in my life. But honestly, I never felt like I was missing anything. Grandma Helen and Grandpa William gave me everything. Real love, the kind that shows up. They were there for every play, every soccer game, every debate competition. They were my parents in every way that mattered. When Grandma died suddenly from a stroke, my world collapsed. I was 18, about to start college, and the woman who raised me was just gone. Grandpa carried us both through the grief. In that darkness, he started talking to me about his work, about justice, about using power responsibly. That's when I decided to follow in his footsteps. I graduated at the top of my law class. Grandpa was there, beaming. My parents sent a card. With his influence, I landed a prosecutor position. I worked hard, late nights, early mornings, and by 30, I was handling high-profile cases. Financial crimes, corruption, things that made headlines. My parents had no idea. If they thought of me at all, they probably imagined some boring office job. Grandpa retired when I was 27, said he'd done his part. Really, he just wanted time with me. Sunday dinners became sacred. He taught me everything about reading people, courtroom strategy, and staying honest when everyone else took shortcuts. When he died at 87, peacefully in his sleep, that old emptiness returned. But this time, I wasn't a lost kid. I was the woman he'd raised me to be. The will reading was a week later. I expected maybe his books, his watch, some keepsakes, but he left me everything. The house, investments, savings, insurance. $3 million. And one sealed letter. "My dearest Haley," it began. "You're reading this because I'm gone. But my love for you continues. You are the greatest joy of my life. I leave you everything, not because of blood, though you are my blood, but because you earned it. Through showing up. Through love. Your parents made their choice long ago. This is mine. Be strong, my girl." I cried. Not sad tears, but tears of validation. Then the attorney handed me another envelope. Documentation. Bank statements showing Grandpa had given Diane $3,000 a month since I was a baby. Over 20 years, that was more than $800,000. Emails from her asking for more. Texts promising to visit, then canceling. Letters from Scott asking for money for failed business ventures. Proof of their neglect and their greed. 30 days later, my lawyer called. My parents had filed a lawsuit claiming undue influence, that Grandpa was incompetent, that I manipulated an old man. I actually laughed. I was in court prosecuting a securities fraud case when I got the message. The irony was perfect. They thought I was still that abandoned baby, that I'd be easy to intimidate. They had no idea I'd spent the last decade taking down people who thought they were untouchable. They had no idea their father-in-law had prepared me for this very moment. And they definitely had no idea who Judge Marcus Brennan was. Which brings us back to that courtroom. Judge Brennan had been Grandpa's clerk 23 years ago. He knew exactly who I was. He knew what Grandpa meant to me. And he knew the people suing me were the same ones who couldn't be bothered to visit a dying man. My mother's attorney started his performance, full of fake emotion, spinning tales of manipulation and lost love. He painted me as the calculating granddaughter who isolated a grieving old man for money. My lawyer didn't need theatrics. The facts spoke for themselves. Meticulous calendars, bank transfers, witnesses who confirmed Grandpa's clarity until the end. Then came my mother, dressed for sympathy, voice trembling on cue. But when cross-examined, the lies fell apart. Records showed she visited 8 times in 10 years, less than once a year. Missed birthdays, graduations, holidays. Hundreds of thousands taken, nothing given. Scott did even worse. Couldn't name one event from my childhood. Avoided stepping inside Grandpa's house for 24 years, but remembered every time he needed money. And then it was my turn. I spoke calmly. I told them about growing up in that house, about every promise broken, every empty visit, every Sunday dinner that mattered. I didn't manipulate him, I said softly. I loved him. There's a difference. When I stepped down, the courtroom was silent. Judge Brennan looked at my parents, then back at me. The plaintiffs claim Judge Parker was manipulated, he said slowly. But the evidence shows a pattern. Absence by the plaintiffs, presence by the defendant. Financial dependence versus responsibility. Broken promises versus kept commitments. Judge Parker didn't need to be manipulated into seeing that pattern. He lived it for 32 years. The gavel came down. The will stands. The plaintiff's petition is denied. Court costs awarded to the defendant. It was over. My mother sobbed. My father cursed under his breath. I gathered my papers. She reached for my hand. Haley, please. I'm your mother. I pulled back. You're the woman who gave birth to me. My mother was Helen Parker. My father was William Parker. They earned those titles by showing up. I walked out. That evening, I sat beside their graves. The tulips I'd planted months earlier were blooming. We won, I whispered. They tried to rewrite history. But the truth stood firm. A week later, our old neighbor, Patricia, came to my door. She handed me an envelope full of letters, all in Grandpa's handwriting. Letters he'd written to Diane but never sent. Each one told the same heartbreaking story. Another recital missed, another birthday ignored, another promise broken. Some letters were angry, some were full of sorrow. All were drenched in love. One stood out. Diane, I've given you over $600,000 in 20 years. I told myself I was helping, but I realize now I was enabling. I'll continue the monthly allowance because you're my daughter, but I'm done rescuing Scott. The greatest gift I ever gave you wasn't money. It was Haley. She saved me after Helen died. I wish you could see what you're missing. I cried through every page. Patricia touched my shoulder. He loved you so much, she said, and he never stopped hoping Diane would change, even though he knew she wouldn't. That night, I read the letters again and again. They were proof of his struggle between love and disappointment. Proof that his final decision, to leave everything to me, came from clarity, not manipulation. Later, I wrote my own will. I was only 32, but I'd learned my lesson. Document everything. I left my assets to charities, education, legal aid, programs for vulnerable kids. Not a cent to Diane or Scott. Not out of hate, but because they'd already taken enough. Then I folded Grandpa's last letter, placed it in my keepsake box, and turned off the light. The night was silent, but in my heart a truth burned brighter than ever. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. Life slowly found rhythm again. Work, the gym, dinners with friends. The inheritance sat quietly, invested. I kept working, because the work mattered more than the money ever could. Months later, I ran into Judge Brennan at a conference. Your grandfather would be proud, he told me. I smiled. He'd probably say I'm still too young. Not long after, the governor's office called. They were appointing me as a judge, one of the youngest ever in our state. During the confirmation hearing, someone asked about the lawsuit with my parents. I answered, "Family values aren't slogans. They're choices. My grandparents showed up for a child they didn't have to raise. That's family. My biological parents didn't. That's the difference." My first day on the bench, I wore Grandpa's old robe. Cleaned, pressed, still too big on my shoulders, but it felt like he was there. The first case I heard was a custody dispute. Two parents fighting over a 5-year-old girl. I looked at them and saw myself. "This child," I said, "didn't ask to be born into your conflict. She deserves parents who show up, who put her needs above their egos. Children remember who makes them feel safe. Make sure what she remembers is love, not war." Word spread quickly about the new judge who didn't tolerate selfishness. 6 months in, I recused myself from a will dispute case, too similar to my own. But before stepping aside, I told both attorneys, show the court a pattern. Not isolated moments. Presence, not biology. That's what matters. The caregiver won, the children lost. Because truth leaves a trail. 3 years later, Scott called. "Your mother's sick," he said. "Heart problems. She wants to see you." "I'm sorry she's unwell," I replied, "but I won't visit. She made her choices. So did I." "You're cold," he snapped. "I'm honest," I said, and hung up. When Diane died months later, I got an email. "Just thought you should know." I read it once, deleted it, and felt nothing but peace. You can't lose what you never had. At 38, I was nominated to the Supreme Court of our state, the same seat Grandpa once held. The hearings were brutal. A senator asked, "You didn't attend your mother's funeral. Doesn't that show a lack of compassion?" I looked straight at him. Compassion must be earned. She had 38 years to be a mother. She chose not to. Her death was sad in the universal sense, but I didn't grieve a relationship that never existed. The appointment went through. Justice Haley Morrison, continuing Grandpa's legacy. From the bench, I wrote opinions that shaped family law. I ruled that parental rights must be earned through consistent presence, not claimed through DNA. Critics said I was biased. I said I was truthful. The ruling became precedent, protecting children and caregivers who actually showed up. Years later, I received a small package. Inside was Diane's wedding ring, found among Scott's belongings after he died. I put it in a drawer and never looked at it again. 10 years after Grandpa's passing, I gave a speech at my old law school. I set my notes aside and told my real story, about abandonment, love, and redefining family. Success, I said, isn't about your career. It's about integrity, about showing up, especially when it's hard. My grandparents gave me everything, not just money. They gave me purpose. The students gave a standing ovation. Some came forward crying, sharing their own stories of being raised by grandparents. "You don't make peace by pretending," I told them. "You make peace by accepting. By finding the people who choose you and choosing them back." 20 years after Grandpa died, the state renamed the Supreme Court building after him, the William Parker Justice Center. I spoke beneath his portrait. "He could have said no when my parents abandoned me," I told the crowd. But he didn't. He showed up every single day. That's love in action. 30 years later, I received the state's highest judicial honor. They played his retirement speech on screen, his voice echoing through the hall. The law is only as good as the people interpreting it. Choose integrity over popularity. Choose truth over convenience. Choose the hard right over the easy wrong. That night, sitting alone in my office, city lights glowing below, I whispered, "I did, Grandpa. I did." When I finally retired, reporters asked, "What's next for you?" For the first time in 30 years, I said, smiling, "Nothing. I'll read, travel, write, and live the life my grandparents made possible." A young lawyer approached me, crying, "Justice Morrison, your case saved us. My grandma kept her house because of your ruling." I hugged her. That's what it was all for. So others wouldn't have to fight as hard. That evening, I visited their graves again. The tulips still bloomed, year after year. I took out Grandpa's letter, the one that said, "You earned this, through showing up, through loving us, through being you." I tucked it back into my pocket. You want to know the ending? There isn't some magical reconciliation. No sudden redemption, just peace, gratitude, and one timeless truth. Family isn't who shares your DNA. Family is who shows up every single day for a lifetime. If you have people like that in your life, protect them. Honor them. Be worthy of them. That's what I did. I honored the ones who showed up. And now I can rest, knowing I lived right by the people who did right by me. That's not a sad ending. That's justice. That's love. That's truth. That's everything.